Hello friends, welcome to Aisha Talks. I hope you all are doing great, and we are going to talk about passive voice today. And something that I'm interested in is passive voice and its rules. So I'm sure all of you have heard and used passive voice. There are many differences between active voice and passive voice. So we are going to discuss that. So let's quickly go for the rules. Some basic rules I'm sure you already know. Rule number one: passive voice produces a sentence in which a subject receives an action. So, in English syntax, you have the doer of the subject and the receiver of the doer of the action, the doer of an action and the receiver of an action. So, passive voice produces a sentence in which the subject receives an action. So, you change the position. So, primary position, you make it into a secondary, and secondary position becomes the primary one. So, active voice produces a sentence in which the subject performs an action. So I'll show you the sentences and examples, then you will understand it better. So active voice produces a sentence in which the subject performs an action. So there is a doer of the subject. So you're primarily not going to talk about it. Instead, you're going to talk about the subject in indirect way that would be performing an action. The places of subject and object in sentences are interchanged in passive voice. So you're going to change the positions. For example, if I say I eat an apple, so you would say Aisha eats an apple. So Aisha, who is the doer of an action, becomes the secondary. So you say an apple was eaten by Aisha. So apple takes the primary position. So that's how you interchange the positions in passive voice. And third form of verb, past participle, will be used only as a main verb in passive voice. Like I've said, an apple was eaten by Aisha. So you are using past participle form, eat, ate, eaten. So you're going to use the third form of eat with the main as a main verb, and of course you're going to use it with an auxiliary, was, verb, whatsoever is the requirement grammatically. So, these are the basic rules. I'm sure you have done it at school level, at college level, but there are some problems. The passive voice only produces unclear and wordy sentences. So you are just changing the primary position into secondary and secondary position into primary unnecessarily. So it produces unclear and wordy sentences. So the change of grammatical voice does not change the meaning, but it weakens the tone and emphasis readability. So what happens is you're just changing the simple present tense into the third form. So the grammatical voice, you're just changing it, so it weakens the message, and you are not changing the meaning, you're not adding more to the meaning, you're just changing the positions of one phrase into another, so it only weakens the message. And sentences are not concise. So overuse of to be, is, are, was, were being used. As I've said, I read number 4. Third form of verb. So whenever you are using third form of verb, you would be using it with auxiliary or to be. So you are going to use it with is, are, was, were, being, been instead of an action word. So doer of the action is never recognized and vague and abstract form is produced. So you are not giving due importance to the doer of an action. For example, when I say an apple was eaten by Aisha, so your focus is on apple and whatever the action, not Aisha. So Aisha is not going to take the primary position, and you are not going to recognize the doer of an action. So whoever does it, for example, he opened the door. So the door was opened by him. So naturally, the action, who is performing the action, the doer of the action takes the least importance in a sentence. So that is why we say that passive voice produces vague sentences, and abstract form is produced. Abstract means which has no concrete shape. So it is vague and it is unclear. So, active voice, why we recommend that you should always write active voice, because your documents, your write ups would be more convincing. When you use active voice, it means you are sure when you knew what to say and who is doing what. So, whatever you are going to write, maybe an essay, maybe an application, letter, your research papers, articles, if you're using active voice, that means that your documents would be more convincing and your documents would be clear, rather than passive voice. If you are overusing passive voice, then your documents would be weaker documents. I'm going to explain later. You should use passive voice. There are some cases when you have to use passive voice, but otherwise in 98% of the cases you should talk in active voice. So action words adds value to the thesis and avoid to be formed to weaken the otherwise stronger verbs. When I say I accomplished a task, and then you say the task was accomplished by Aisha. So you are using to be form unnecessarily. So use stronger verbs when you say demonstrate and illustrate, and when you say accomplished and achieved. These are action verbs. So it shows an action. It shows that you have achieved something. So use them in the present form. Use them in present tense. Do not change its form because it would weaken the otherwise stronger verbs. For example, the final draft was submitted before the March 10th deadline by Mr. ABC. Now, Mr. ABC submitted the final draft before the March 10th deadline. Now, you see the first sentence, it is in passive voice, and the second sentence, it is in active voice. But do you notice that there is no change in meaning? The meaning doesn't change. So, why would you change an already active sentence into passive voice? Why? If it does not add more value, it does not add more meaning to the message. Why? Because you are just changing one position to another and this position to the last one. So it is not going to add more meaning or more importance to your message. Only you are shuffling the phrases, and you are just making unnecessarily changes just because you want to make it into a passive voice. So let's see another example. Additional information can be obtained by employees from our SOPs. Now this sentence again is in passive voice. Do you notice can be obtained? So when you say can be obtained, I want to show you this. So this is actually this is the be form, and you are using it unnecessarily. When you say it in active voice instead. So when you say in active voice instead, employees can obtain the additional information from our SOPs. Now this sentence is in active voice, and it is more direct. It is more focused. It is going to convey the meaning as it is. Employees can obtain the additional information from our SOPs. Full stop. Now this sentence is more convincing. It is more direct and it is more understandable. Instead, you would say additional information can be. So you're just rotating the message. You are just trying to say it in a passive voice without adding more value to it and without adding more importance to it. So what is the effect of it? Why would you do it? Let's see another example. So amendments were introduced to strengthen the law and legislative system of Pakistan. Similarly, do you see in this first sentence it is written in passive voice, but you cannot identify the subject over here. On the other hand, if you see the other example, the Constitution of 1973 introduced amendments to strengthen the law and legislative system of Pakistan. So the Constitution of 1973, as you can see, this is the subject. Now you know in active sentence, you know that you are talking about the Constitution of year 1973, where amendments were introduced to strengthen the law and legislative system of Pakistan. But in the passive voice, you can easily skip the important information. The Constitution of 1973 is not there. So in order to just make it passive voice, you are going to drop important piece of information just because you want to say the same information in passive voice. So please remember that while changing active voice into passive voice, you have to sacrifice in some way or the other, and you may lose some information data. So active voice more closely resembles to spoken language. So do you speak like that? Breakfast was eaten by me. The door was opened by me. The car was driven by me. Come on, this is so fake and this is so artificial. It is so unnatural. Do you speak like that? The letter was written by me. Are you performing a theatrical play? Are you performing a play? Are you performing something on theater? So you're not doing it. So these types of sentences make your spoken language vague, funny, unnatural, because we don't speak like that. So active voice is close to the spoken language, For example, I consume my breakfast, or I have opened the door, I drive my car. Now this is natural, and this is more understandable, and nobody will make fun of you. People will accept you the way you are. You are a speaker of English language, so people will accept you the way you are. So don't try to break the syntax, and don't try to change the active voice into passive voice unnecessarily, because you are going to make fun of yourself. So passive voice can get you into trouble. Now let's see the example. To use passive voice, you can hide weaknesses. For example, the telephone was invented in the 19th century. Now, since I could not find who invented the telephone, so you are just going to skip the information. As I was telling you that in passive voice, you can skip some information easily, just because you are changing the position. So you can drop information, you can drop as important piece of information easily. So over here, since let's say a student could not recall who invented telephone, maybe during an examination, so he would make a sentence where he could actually, make a sentence, still provide some information to the teacher, to the examiner, and hide his weakness. So he would write the telephone was invented in the 19th century. Now over here, he is not recognizing the doer of the action. Who invented the telephone? Did I invent? Did you invent? So that the writer is not identifying the doer of the doer of the subject. So the doer of the sentence is not known. So you can use passive sentences to hide your weaknesses, but please remember that the teacher will understand. The English teacher will understand, and anyone can question you that who invented it, and who did this, and who has performed this action, where was it performed. So if you try to hide some information by writing passive sentences, you can get away with it for a few minutes, for some for one event to another event, but sometime somewhere you will be caught. Someday you will be caught, and people will question you that you are providing half of the information. So please write one more sentence after this, or please explain this, and please write a description of it, so people, your teacher, anyone, a listener, can actually question you for more information. So it is not a solution. Writing passive sentences is not a solution, therefore. Okay, now we come to the part that the passive voice is acceptable. Of course, it is acceptable. It is part of English language, and we use it. You know, we can use it. When the doer of an action is not important, and when the doer of an action is unknown. For example, you must have seen in media reports. God forbids, if a crime scene is reported, and you don't know who committed the crime, and who was the culprit, who was the criminal. So then you would say that the this was done by an unknown person. So you would say that an event, an incident of stealing mobile phones was recorded on street 1 or 2 or 3, full stop. Now over here, you don't know the doer of an action, or maybe unknown, or you think that the doer of an action was not important. So in media reports, it is possible, it is acceptable that you use passive voice. So usually in media reports it is possible, and also in research papers. In research papers, if you want to report a study, a finding, over there also passive voice is acceptable. So over there you can use passive voice, but only 2 to 3%. Not complete. You cannot write a complete paper in passive voice. You have to write it in active voice. And then when you are reporting a study, when you are giving statistics and things like that, then you can give a few sentences in passive voice. But still try to provide complete information. Do not skip a piece of information. Do not try to hide information just because you are writing passive sentences. So for active voice, follow the who does what sequence. So if you are thinking that how to write active sentences, so you have to see who is doing what. So who does what sequence. This is the formula. You can use this formula to write active voice sentences. And turn the sentence clause around, putting the subject first. So these are the 3 hints that I would like to give if you want to write sentences in active voice. So turn the sentence and put the subject first. So if I say that uh, the car was driven by Aisha, so you have to write the subject first. So Aisha drives a car. Change the verb to eliminate the helping form to be. So When I say is driven, so you are using is and driven, the third form of drive. So you would say Aisha drives the car. And you have to restructure the sentence in your mind, and maybe on a piece of paper you can write, you can try writing the sentence one time in one way or the other, and this would help you restructure the sentence. So these are a few examples that I wanted to give, and now I would like to give you a small activity. I would like to give you a small activity of passive voice. Okay, so passive voice. If you see that, if you read the sentence number one, Poland was invented in 1973, thus initiating the Second World War. Now, if I ask you to change this sentence in active voice, how would you write it? The Second World War was initiated by, so you have to, some information is missing. So you have to write the Second World War was initiated by Germany in 1939, or Poland and during which Poland was invaded. Similarly, the possibility of cold fusion has been examined for many years. Now, over here again, you don't know who is doing this. So the possibility of cold fusion has been examined. So you don't know who examined it. So this is half of the information. So you have to write that the possibility of let's say, the possibility of cold fusion has been examined for many years by scientists, and you have to provide the name. So if you want to change it into active voice, so you will say scientist, that you can give name, um, examined. So you are going to remove the has been part. So you are going to just cut this. You see this? You are going to cut this has been. You don't need it now. So you are just going to use the main verb, has examined the possibility of cold fusion for many years. But still you need, let's say, Robert. So now you have the subject. Now you have the complete information. In the previous sentence, you did not know who performed the action, who performed the experiment. You did not know. So this is the incomplete information, and this is the deficiency of passive sentences. In passive sentences, some information is always missing. So you have to see whether you are mentioning the doer of the action or not. So the problem will be discussed thoroughly by the speaker. The speaker thoroughly discussed the problem. This is easy. All of the mistakes were made by him. So he did all the mistakes. Oh, all the mistakes. This is easy. Sorry. So this is easy. And then, if you have to, an experiment was performed to test the rate of reaction. Again, the doer of the action is missing. So who is the doer? We don't know. So who performed? You don't know. An experiment was performed to test the rate of reaction. So how will you change it into active voice? You cannot change it because you don't have the complete information. This is the reason I'm saying that you cannot change passive voice into active voice if you don't have the doer. So you have to first identify the subject. So you will need to add some information over here. You will say an experiment was performed to test the rate of reaction. So you would say, let's say Aisha performed the experiment to test the rate of reaction. Now this is complete. You have to identify the doer. To save time, the paper was written on a computer. Now over here again, you have to restructure it. The paper, you don't know who is the doer. Who has written the paper on computer? Did I or you? So computer was used by who? So you don't know the doer over here again. So it is showing incomplete information. So you have to say, let's say, Aisha has written the paper on computer to save her time. Now this is complete information. So my dear friends, as I'm saying that passive sentences would give you vague and unclear sentences. There are only 2% possibilities of using passive voice in English language. When you want to intentionally omit the doer of the subject and when the subject is unknown, then you can use passive voice. Or in research papers, when you are giving quotes and when you are giving references to some other studies. So when you are reporting, usually while writing the abstract, this study was completed to perform, so in that case you can use passive voice. Otherwise, in regular, in usual everyday talk, in everyday communication, in everyday writing, you are not recommended to use passive voice for more than 2%. It means that if you're using 9 sentences in active voice, then you are allowed to use 1 sentence in passive voice. But do not make all the passive sentences, because it will make your writing unclear, vague, and it will be out of focus. Still, if you are writing a passive sentence after writing 9 active sentences or 10 active sentences, make sure that while writing the passive sentence, you have provided the complete information. Have you mentioned the doer? Have you mentioned the subject? Have you mentioned the receiver of the action? Have you mentioned the doer of the action? Did you change the verb form? Have you written the be form? Did you use the third form of the verb? And there are so many questions that would follow. So you have to make sure that you have followed all the rules of passive sentences. So then it will be a complete information. But let me just give you a reminder that it will not add more meaning to it. You are just shuffling the message this way or that way, but you are not adding more information. You are not adding more meaning to it. You are just changing the position of the phrases. So it is not going to be a grammatical, let's say, uh, it would not be it would not be an achievement. It would not be something huge that you would do. You are just changing, you are just shuffling the grammatical components here and there. Still, if you want to do it, you have to use 9 sentences or 8 sentences in active form, and then the 10th or 11th sentence in passive form. And after writing one passive sentences, go back to your active sentence mode, because active sentences will be clearer, more focused, and it would give you a better impression of your writing. It would give a better impression of your personality. So write in active voice. Do not unnecessarily change into passive voice, because it would make your message unclear and vague. And if you like the video, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And this is Aisha Khan signing off. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you.